Chapter 4. Do you want a party? It had been 3 weeks since David went to the sporting goods store with Ashley and made the decision to only take one of the 3 pills he was supposed to take when he took his Chembal pills. In those 3 weeks following, he saw more and more of Ashley. But more shocking to him, he was seeing more of the world around him. He noticed it slowly at first, being wrapped up in Ashley, and the time he spent with her was at first an all-consuming endeavor. But as the days went by, he couldn't help noticing how not only did he just not like most of the things that surrounded him, but he also despised them. He despised his crappy car with its inability to remember his preference of his name. He despised Steve and his nearly nameless family, always going on about the grass. How he let that be a driving factor in his motivation to mow was now beyond him. He despised Simon and Matthew and the actual meaningless conversations they had. How he let those ghoulish figures chum up to him from the onset of meeting them floored him. He despised the charge station where all the medicated and honest folk went in the mornings before work to recharge the fusion cores of their cars. He didn't despise Ashley. She was quickly becoming his safe haven from all those things. Whenever he got tired of sitting around his house with those walls painted with colors so bland and boring, he wanted to run his fist through them. He went to Ashley's place. Whenever Steve asked about the grass for the umpteenth time of the week, he went to Ashley's place. Whenever he saw Simon and Matthew bumbling his way at the office, he slipped away to Ashley's cube and chatted her up. She always welcomed his company, and he was finding it easier and easier to talk with her. His flirting was at the point of rivaling hers, and they spent more than one night a week at this point together. He even turned her onto his newly rediscovered favorite hobby, watching old movies. Movies from decades past, some as old as 100 years even. She never found it as entertaining as he did, but a few of the love stories always got her attention more than she cared to admit. They had really become something of a pair, and David really began to feel like he found something worth waking up for in the mornings. The only issue with everything was the headaches. This was a new development that started nearly the same time as his Chembal intake came down. He noticed it always first thing in the morning, as he woke in his plush 4U bed with its sensor technology that helped you fall asleep and wake up quicker. He noticed it when he was watching the movies he enjoyed so much on his TV. He noticed it at work while he stared at the monitor. He even noticed it driving or eating and drinking. It seemed to be an endless wave of dull, aching headaches. The kind of headache you get when you spent too much time trying to wrap your mind around a large problem you can't quite answer. He asked Ashley what she thought one night while they watched a classic Clint Eastwood Western. "You ever get headaches?" he asked somewhat plainly. She looked up at him. She had chosen to lay her head on his leg, which was in a crisscross pattern with his other leg. It was their usual lounging about position. Yeah, David. I get headaches sometimes, like everybody else in the world," she said, looking at him like he was asking a question with an obvious answer. No, I mean, do you ever just notice that you have a real dull headache all the time? It seems like I always have one just lingering, he replied. She looked off to the ceiling to ponder his question. Maybe sometimes, but not really all the time. Mostly just, I guess, in the mornings or after a couple hours at work. They always slip away after I get up and moving or after the noon buzzer. She answered honestly. David pondered that for a moment. After you get up and moving and after the noon buzzer? David trailed off, rubbing the bottom of his chin. Well, what's the problem? She asked. It's just an occasional headache, David. It's not too big a deal. Yeah, you're probably right, I guess. David trailed off again, still considering what she said. He felt this deep-rooted thought. He wanted to yank it up from the bottom of his mind and put together whatever dots he was trying to connect. David had stayed the night at Ashley's place and awoke to her alarm that went off 5 minutes later than the one he had at his home with the worst headache he had felt yet. He sluggishly sat up in the bed and rocked himself back and forth as he dealt with the pain after the alarm was shut down with Ashley's awakening. He looked over at the nightstand next to the side of the bed he was on and looked at his Chembal bottle with a level of anger he was not used to. For some reason today, with his thoughts reaching out further than they had in so long, coupled with the worst headache he had felt, in recent memory, he really despised the thought of taking the medication. He growled slightly as he reached over to the bottle and opened it, shook the bottle in a half-awake daze, and had 4 pills fall out into his hand. He stared at this image for a moment. He swore he heard 2 voices talking to him in his head, although it could have very well just have been the effects of being half asleep still. Take all these pills. You know that's the amount you should be on anyways. This path you are on is a danger to your health. One voice told him. The other voice, a voice that David believed now was once just that tingling feeling he once had in the back of his brain, spoke a very different message to him. You are not meant to take pills. This is wrong. David stared numbly at the pills in his hand and told himself that first voice in his head was the scared teenager who didn't want to see his mother weep again. But at least when she wept that day in the doctor's office, she showed emotion and for a brief moment didn't walk around like a zombie. David put his pinky finger over one of the 4 pills in his hand, securing it in his palm, and dropped the 3 others back in the bottle. Although David and Ashley worked in the same office and had been spending large amounts of time together, they still did not show up to work in the same car. Instead, they drove in their respective vehicles, her with her fancy new yellow model, and him with his older model that never, and David meant never, will get his damn name right. His headache persisted throughout the morning and only seemed to get worse when he got to his desk. Oddly, he noted that while he spent his time out by the smoke shack by the parking lot, the headache seemed to lessen. But that was not enough time for it to go completely away, and it returned in force once he sat at his desk and put his hand over the sensor pad to begin working. This part of his day also seemed much different to him, whereas before he felt that he had a stable amount of work incoming and never had much time to sit around waiting for the next task. He blew through everything. David's morning reports and reviews, which at one time would keep him busy for hours, could now be done within only 2 hours, leaving him a large amount of time to sit and browse the other reports and reviews of the division. He found this to be the most interesting part of his day. Somehow, with taking less Chembal, he was able to move quicker through his job duties even with the splitting headaches he was dealing with. All the while having a surplus of time to investigate what else was happening in his unit. At first, he found it to be fun, and he even thought that maybe he could find something that he could identify as an issue, and perhaps create a project to improve and move up the corporate ladder quicker. After all, this may have been government work, but it felt oddly more so like a business than civil service. Nowadays, however, the reports and reviews he was looking at confused or even concerned him. He began to note that the withdrawal of taking less Chembal, based off the studies of scientists and doctors from the Chem Farm Company, showed extreme chemical imbalance, bouts of anger and depression, migraines, and worst of all being susceptible to terrorism. That last one shocked him to the core, more so than the others. Being susceptible to terrorism? David thought to himself, that's a big shift from bad headaches. He sat there for a moment to ponder that, then remembered about 2 months ago, the most recent terrorist attack that hit the news. He began to research the attack and learned that it was an attack on one of the largest chem farm plants in the nation. With the hit against the site, a lot of areas were battling shortage issues not only on Chembal, but 5 other medications, and that imports and donations to the surrounding areas was keeping the threat of instance in relative check. The threat of instance in check, David thought to himself. He was somewhat shocked that people having to take less medication was a threat. He couldn't find anything on who the person was that blew up the plant, only that it was a man who was part of the fringe 1% who was not on Chembal and was asserting their anti-balanced views on the nation and the world's populations. We removed this person's identity and the motive behind why they did such a horrible thing, David thought to himself. But then he paused and thought for a moment longer. Not us, not we, them. They removed this person's identity and their motive. This was the first time David realized he didn't want to see himself as part of the system he worked in. He couldn't put his finger quite on the reason why yet, but he knew there had to be more here than just a blanketed terrorist who was chemically unbalanced and wanted to push an anti-balance ideology on people. This explanation felt played out. It felt incorrect. It felt phony. He switched gears then. Instead of looking at reports and reviews from his own section, he began digging deeper into other units. He quickly figured out the password used by his section to unlock work applications, and other resources followed the same nomenclature in other units. The password was simply the division's abbreviation with the number 1 inch at the end. He wanted to see if all divisions within the government followed suit, He moved to the National UCA Workers site, where all employees with all their reports and things of the like are uploaded as they were completed. He looked over the other divisions' names and chose National Corporate Monetary Review, or the NCMR, selected that section's application and typed in what he hoped the password might be. He was astonished when it gave him a simple prompt that the system could identify his username was not part of NCMR's list of reporters, and asked if he was given special prompt to access the site's sensitive information. David numbly pressed yes on the message on the screen and began to comb the site information. This is the UCA, the best and strongest nation. For some reason, we have the easiest passwords to decode for our government divisions? David thought, in complete shock. How could this be? Why was this so simplistic? It almost felt like the passwords were made simple, so that simple people could access them, under the impression no one would ever just think to go into a division that wasn't theirs. But what about the terrorist? David thought. If we are under constant threat, why would our passwords be so simple? He rifled through a few of the digital reports and findings, not locating much of anything he could understand, and nearly moved on to another division until he found a conference recap note report submitted by an admin assistant for the assistant director of the NCMR. He went into the recap report wondering what it might entail. He was only ever part of small section meetings run by Matthew that always felt so unimportant to the actual work he was doing. The recap began. Figures indicate Census Tech has lost some ground sales in the cell phone department. This can be easily identified as due to Arrowgate Solutions releasing its new MS plus 9 watts phone before the Census Tech's CT Phone 11. It is believed that the CT Phone 11 would have outperformed the MS plus 9, as Census Tech phones have done traditionally. But due to the unexpected terrorist attack in the Taiwan Islands plant, the CT Phone 11 did not release before the MS plus 9, causing consumers to opt for the Arrowgate Solutions phone as the only new option. We'll ensure that production on the MS plus 9 is lowered and shift production workers under seasonal operation for Arrowgate Solutions over to Census Tech to correct the competition levels. David was in a state of disbelief. How could this division in the government's body just decide what Arrowgate Solutions would do with its temporary labor force? And why would Arrowgate Solutions want to give up the lead in the market to Census Tech? Census Tech was the older company. It was born all the way back in the 1980s as the country began to flirt with shifting to the modern form of energy usage. Nuclear power back then was heavily considered, but it wasn't until they created the new form of nuclear power plants before they began to incorporate it into everyday living. Census Tech was part of that new energy wave. It seemed overnight these bizarre new power plants were constructed, and Census Tech signed the first government contract to use its technology and research in relation to the new energy sources. They even used that contract to help remove telephone poles throughout the nation in the early 2000s and replace them with the energy relay pylons. These pylons didn't really look like the ones from the early 20th century. However, they were mostly similar in height to the old telephone poles, but were made with a metal rod that rose straight up, and atop the rod was a black ball. This ingenious invention and discovery in the early days of the 21st century helped make the new nuclear power plants reach even further out. Instead of having to build a new power plant in a certain radius, they could use the energy relay pylons to channel the energy throughout the areas from the plants. This helped keep the secrets behind the power plant's nuclear innovation under wraps, as the less constructed, the less likely someone would learn and steal the innovative techniques within. David continued reading. The division has also officially given the pharmaceutical company ChemPharm the green light to begin early human trials for its next generation of the drug, Chembal. The division expects, by early 2057, the company will begin commercial production and midway through the same year be ready to disperse to the public. Initially advised to answer the lingering issue of male and female sexual displacement with the next Chembal generation, ChemPharm instead developed Fertility Plus's drug, which should address the sexual disinterest in both sexes without extreme alteration of the Chembal drug. This will help ensure a sizable profit margin, ensure that the next generation of Chembal can be properly strengthened and not diluted in any way, as well as helping increase population growth from the last 2 decades' decreased shift. See MDMQ Director Meeting Recap for further information on detailed drug information. This hit David like a car colliding with a brick wall at top speed. Even ChemFarm was being directed by the government on how to make business decisions. And if this was any indication, maybe every company, or at least every large company, was doing as directed by the national government. But why? This was not in line with what the public was told. We have always been told these are large, independent entities that make decisions based off what they find in their own research and work, David thought. Yet here it is right in these notes. They are being told what to produce and sell to us. Why? They thought lingered with David for some time. He wasn't sure how long, but in the middle of his thought process, the noon buzzard rang, notifying the teams hard at work in this building, and no doubt in every building in the country, and possibly even the world, that it was time to take your second dosage of Chembal. David forced his eyes off the screen, moved to grab his bottle and paused. He stared at the bottle, then back at the screen. Then he moved slightly out of view of the monitor and opened his bottle, disbelief and fear in his face. He shook the bottle to replicate the sound of pills falling out, took the time to open his synth juice cap and take a swig, then closed both his pill bottle and his juice bottle. But this time, he didn't take any of his Chembal. He felt like this was the right thing to do, the first right thing he had done in some time. David was determined to see what else he would find, and what other parts of his brain he could unlock with it fully freed from the shackles of his prescription. David wanted to run over to Ashley's cube all day to tell her what he found out. He wanted to slap her pill out of her hand and tell her not to take the drug. He wasn't fully sure yet why, but he knew this was the first time ever that he felt like the drug should not be taken. He had to stay calm, which was easier said than done. The headache he had been dealing with was worsening 1 hour after not taking even that one pill of Chembal, and he figured after his afternoon reports were wrapped up, he would investigate his own division's meeting recap that was referenced by the NCMR. He logged into the site, found the director's meeting recap for his own division, and began reading. MDMQ reviews of Chem Farm Company's newest medication, Fertility Plus, finds that the drug can stimulate the sex drives of both sexes to increase the probability of female conception by 45%. Currently, the version of the drug administered to men was cleared for public usage, was given the final all clear, and has been showing promising signs of stimulating the male sex drive and hormone output without compromising the effects of chemical balancing performed by Chembal. The female version of Fertility Plus is on a 2-month predicted lag, as Chem Farm is still trying to address the issue of complete balance with female test subjects after taking the medication. Chem Farm has ensured the MDMQ is close to a breakthrough and should be able to provide a detailed medical list of results within a 2-week timeframe. This has inadvertently led to male-to-female tension, based off a study performed by the Social Dynamics Department, SDD, as men in joint households are taking the medication, but their female counterparts are not yet medicated. An unexpected result, men are pushing for sexual encounters, as expected and hoped for, but their female counterparts are not as sexually driven without the medication. Though concerning, SDD has noted there have been no incidents of unbalanced behavior from either party in these households as all parties surveyed are properly medicated with Chembal. As the day wrapped up and David was rushing to his car hoping to get out of the place and run over to Ashley's to tell her everything he had just read, he was stopped by Matthew and Simon. Whoa, David, you are in a rush today," bellowed Matthew. David winced in agony as he stopped in his tracks, hearing Matthew's voice behind him. He turned around to face them, his face struggling to hide the nervous, frantic feelings he was experiencing. "Hey, Matthew. Hey, Simon, how's it going?" David asked, in a rushed tone. He was desperate to end this fruitless dialogue quickly. "Hey, David. It's been a pretty good day, thank you for asking," Simon automatically followed up with. Matthew spoke next, as was typical with these two. "You know, David, I got to say you have really been working at a shockingly quicker pace than I have ever seen before these last few weeks. You aren't trying to bump up ahead of me for Bandre's spot when the old man retires, are you?" Matthew said with a chuckle to indicate it was a joke, but David was able to detect a slight worry under that chuckle. "Oh, nothing like that, Matthew. I wouldn't be developed enough yet, or anything like that," David said quickly, not realizing he was slipping into casual conversation when he was expected to be professional in tone. Matthew smiled weakly. "Oh goodness, David, you are underselling yourself and your ability to perform. You're one of my best, and here lately, it seems everything is completed in record time with you. I just hope we are keeping you busy enough." Simon also followed up. "Yeah, David, everyone's been looking at the work tracker reports. You are crushing us," Simon said with a smile, letting David know it was a positive thing. David's headache was going back and forth between distracting and mildly irritating, and listening to this pointless conversation was the last thing he really needed at this moment in time. He looked at his smartwatch quickly and said, "Well, thank you both for the compliments, but it's nothing really. I do have an engagement I must attend tonight before I head home. But I will see you both tomorrow." He turned quickly before either had a chance to follow up with him and started at a brisk pace to his car. As David hopped into the car and pressed the one button, the car in turn started to talk to David, and his headache nearly erupted like a volcano in his head as he put his hand on the auto-drive sensor. He closed his eyes and bowed his head over the steering wheel in agony as the car asked, "Good afternoon, Dave. Are we heading straight home today, or the other residential address that is often visited during the week afternoons?" The car's inability to remember not to call him Dave was pushing him to a breaking point. But today of all days, it should have remembered. "My name, you stupid, worthless, artificial waste of time and money, is David, not Dave. I have told you every day for nearly 5 fucking years to log my name in your stupid, useless note files as David. I hate you. I hate you. I fucking hate how goddamn stupid you are." What started in a quiet voice turned into a yelling and howling voice of sheer frustration for David. As he started yelling, he began to slam his fist on the steering wheel while yelling his profanities and letting years of rage unload of the car's AI. "I'm sorry, Dave. It seems you might be experiencing a serious case of imbalanced behavior. Would you like me to route us to the nearest hospital?" The car's AI replied, in its usual tone, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "No!" David barked. "I'm officially turning your dizzy bitch ass off for good, you waste of innovation." He finished with the car today, and for the foreseeable future at that. Without evening fully realizing what he was saying and doing, David reached for the panel in which the AI's computer was nestled and began to pry it open. The AI system warned David this action was not recommended, and if he wanted, it could call the authorities to come and detain him during his episode. He ripped open the panel and saw the wires connecting to the AI's mainframe in his car. He shouted a near bloodthirsty victory, "Aha!" as he reached for the wires connecting the computer and ripped them all out. The AI was now no longer able to connect to any of the other functions of the car, including the internet or other communication devices within the car. He also knocked out its voice module wiring when he did this, and the car's AI voice over the speakers went silent as soon as he yanked. The only thing that didn't stop was the display screen on the dashboard, still showed the car manufacturer's logo, indicating the AI was still on, but trapped within the confines of the mini-computer in the car. David took a deep sigh as he listened to silence, and instead of using the now useless auto-drive sensor, he put a foot on the brake pad, shifted the car's gears from park to drive, and began to drive himself to Ashley's house to explain what he uncovered today, all the while enjoying the sound of silence clearly declaring his victory over the car. "Are you sure you're actually okay right now?" Ashley asked him with legitimate concern in her face. He told her everything he read, and most importantly, how he didn't take his afternoon Chembal at all. "I mean, David, they give it to us to balance us out, to avoid getting caught up in silly, unfounded, half-cocked plots. They used to have a word for it, but it's almost never used today." She trailed off, caught up in trying to remember the word. "The word I think you are trying to use is conspiracy," David said. "And Ashley, I'm telling you this isn't some silly thing I just made up or misread. I don't understand the problem here. You are the one that told me you take less than your prescribed dose to help give you an advantage, remember?" "Yes, David, I did. But I didn't say stop taking the medication completely. Goodness' sake, this is your health we are talking about here." She put her hand on his, letting him know she was very much worried about this path he was walking down. "Look, you didn't take your Chembal at all after this morning, and you have had a splitting headache all day, David. I just think you need to calm down and reassess the situation and what you think you read," she said, then stopped with a puzzled look on her face. "And besides, how did you get into 2 other departments' files? Every department has a password to protect sensitive information. She followed up with. He smiled at her and told her the truth. I cracked the passwords pretty easily. He boasted. All I had to do was take the abbreviation of the department and add a number 1. He laughed. She looked at him with shock in her beautiful green eyes. Why in the world would it? She stopped again, looking off as she considered what he said. Because our department password is our abbreviation and the number 1. She concluded without him telling her how he cracked it. It can't be that simple, can it? She asked, snapping her eyes back to him with a slight look of questioning doubt in them. It was, he stated simply. The federal government doesn't realize how easily they can make someone into a top-notch hacker with their super simple passwords. But before he let that sink in with her, he pushed on knowing he had her questioning things. Look, Ash, the truth is, look around us. Every day, either it be at work or in the public, look at how many people are on so much Chembal that they get zombified. Or the people who are right on the cusp of that being them. Don't even get me started on the ones that are re-educated. As he spoke, an image of his mother flashed in his eyes, of her staring blankly like she often did at the TV set in the old family home. The truth is, he continued, planning to make his point on the subject here, they have to make the passwords easy. They have to make the workloads and the work itself easy for the ones who can barely put any higher levels of thought out so they can still be a part of it all, he finished, his brown eyes penetrating and searching into her green hazel eyes for acceptance. He was hoping this all truly was falling into place for her, that she could see what he was trying to show her. If she did, then it would make his next choices in life easier. He didn't want to experience or navigate these fresh waters alone. Although she didn't agree with David that night, she still took her evening Chembal pill, one less than what she was supposed to. She didn't rule anything he set out. I will look at it tomorrow. How about that? She said, when I get to my desk, I will try to get as much work as I can done quickly, without drawing too much attention. Then, I will start prying into the same departments you did and see if the passwords work like you said. If the meeting notes are like you have said, then we can talk more about what this means. Deal? She asked him. Of course, David said with slight excitement in his voice. The chance that she was giving him was bigger than any other anyone had given him before. He only hoped they hadn't figured out what he had done and removed the notes of the meeting from the federal websites. The next morning as they got up for work, David again for the 3rd time in a row opted not to take his Chembal. He was done with it. He was sure of it. Everything was beginning to expand for him just in the short time he stopped. But the headaches he felt after the alarm went off in the morning, or when got in the car, or when he sat down at his desk in his cubicle, was an ever-present throb. It was a tough new development, and he wondered how in the world he would combat it going forward. Nonetheless, while he mulled over how he would go about adjusting to the headaches, he flew through his morning reports and reviews, as was his new custom. He wondered how Ashley was doing, and if she was looking into the things he told her about last night. As he sat at his desk thinking about this freely, he heard from the opening of his cube, "Hey, David, how are you this morning?" It was Matthew. David knew it before he turned around to face him. David knew he was going to be dragged into a long-winded conversation about things that had little bearing on his current ordeals in life. With a sigh, he turned his chair around and faced the music. At lunch, David was standing out by the smoke shelter for smokers waiting for Ashley. They agreed to meet here after the morning portion of the day. Since there were so few smokers left in the building, it would be quiet. But also, not strange, since David was one of the last few that did smoke, and Ashley had been seen around him enough. They would seem to be doing nothing out of the ordinary. He saw her walking fast towards him in heels, which he noted was an impressive feat. He couldn't do it at least. She came up to him in a hurry, and as she got within whisper range, hissed in a shocked voice, "It's all true." "I know," David said calmly. "Did you pop your noon Chembal dose?" He followed up with her. "No," she said with fear in her voice. "I wasn't sure it was the right thing to do though, David. There's more." This is what he was hoping would happen when he brought Ashley in, that she would help build the picture that he was struggling to see. "What?" he asked with a slight hint of excitement in his voice. He couldn't quite explain why it excited him, but it did. He should have known with her facial features it was something to not be excited about. Chembal doesn't just chemically balance us out, it acts as a numbing agent. For migraines from excessive exposure to EED, she declared. David frowned. EED? He echoed cluelessly. What's EED? Why does it cause migraines? He asked, hoping she found the answers. I don't know, she said quickly, eyes darting around them, causing David to also shoot a quick glance around the parking lot. But I know it's why you have been having headaches. When you went from 2 pills to 1, the amount of numbing agent you had lowered dramatically, and it is why you have had them constantly since you stopped completely yesterday. It is also why I am starting to feel 1 slowly coming on. She paused quickly, then added, but I am not sure why you went from 2 to 1 and felt the headache so quickly. It's the same dosage as me, and my head never hurt like what you described. David paused at her question. The truth was, David was not prescribed 2 pills like Ashley. He was supposed to take 3 a dose, and truth be told, he knew deep down that if he visits a doctor for his next annual checkup, there was a strong likelihood they will up to 4. He was already slipping prior to all this. Ashley came around at the perfect moment in his life to create a storm, causing him to question everything that he was doing in life, up to this point. He stared back at her and said, I'm not sure, Ashley. It's strange, maybe it was because I can get headaches easier. Maybe it's a tolerance you built up over time. I couldn't say, but if we are surrounded by this EED stuff, I'd like to know what it is, he said, somewhat unhappy with himself, not admitting that he was never supposed to take only 2 pills. I say we try to dig as deep as we can today in the afternoon, Ashley responded. Maybe then we will get the answers to our questions, she continued. Yeah, David chuckled. But then what? There was no then what moment for them. They looked for any indicator on the sites for what EED was and why it was excessive around people. They were unable to find anything new, just more of the same. David knew they were missing something somewhere, but he couldn't place his finger on it, which drove him mad. The next 3 weeks seemed to drag for both of them as they poured through all the systems. They could trying to find anything, anywhere, that would give them a hint as to what the EED was. The answer always seemed so close, but always elusive. After 3 weeks of digging and finding nothing, David and Ashley decided they would go with Plan B. They weren't frantic. They weren't insane or bloodthirsty people. They were just people. They were seeing each other and wanted to keep seeing each other. Simply put, they would, instead of seeking answers to questions that bothered them, they would just take some aspirin and start hiding in plain sight so they could start building a future together. It was a hard pill for David to swallow. He wanted the truth. He wanted answers. He really liked his new lease on life. He really liked Ashley. She was at this point his girlfriend. At least, that's how he figured. Although he would always keep his eye out for the truth. If he wasn't meant to have it, then he wouldn't. He would be happy for what he did have. David pondered all this as he got ready for work that Monday morning. He put on a pair of blue jeans, something he was doing more often now when he went to work, and a button-up that was gray with black lines running in crisscrossed patterns. He was bobbing his head and tapping his hands on the steering wheel to the song he was listening to. He found an oldies station that played hits from the 20th century. It wasn't funded by anybody, and there was no DJ. It was just song after song and no commercials. He stumbled onto it out of sheer boredom one day after work. As he pulled into the parking lot, he walked up to his usual standing spot in the smoke hut, smoked his usual 3 cigarettes, and then waltzed into the building. It was a typical start to the week, and David simply sighed as he got a whiff of coffee and butterless popcorn. He sat at his desk midway through the morning, already done with his work and somewhat casually looking into the other departments, like he had been for the past 3 weeks, just minus the adrenaline. When he heard a familiar voice call to him from the opening of his cube. David, these men would like a word with you." Matthew's voice sounded weak and scared, in a way David had never heard before. He turned around to face Matthew and the 2 strangers that stared at him coldly. As soon as he caught sight of the situation, he knew something was way off. Matthew and his overweight frame were trembling in fear. His face was red. The 2 men behind him couldn't have been more alike in the element of fear-inducing atmosphere they created with their presence, but were so different physically. One of them was short, maybe 5'8". He also looked to weigh a good 50 to 60 pounds over what was healthy for his height. His suit was wrinkled and seemed to be in poor care. It was a light brown color. His face was flushed red and showed years of alcohol abuse as well as the remnants of morning scruff on it. He clearly either forgot to shave or just didn't care. His eyes were bloodshot with dark bags under his eyes. His hair was short on the sides and peppered with a gray and light brownish comb-over on top of his head. The other man stood maybe a solid 6'3". His suit looked new and was jet black. His head was shaven bald and was shiny. He had a strong jawline that looked like a man who enjoyed the steroids the military offered when you were a frontline private. His eyes were hard ice and pale blue. There was a sense of extreme danger lurking within them. His skin was pale and clean. You got the feeling this man took personal hygiene and bodily health very seriously. Just a glance at these two strangers, David knew he was in trouble. He just hoped it was a slap on the wrist for looking around the other department's files. He had no clue how off the mark he was. These men were the coming of doom.